At the end of a hot afternoon, a German shepherd walks through an abandoned park and accidentally disturbs a beehive hidden under dry leaves. Within seconds, hundreds of bees cover his body, forming a golden layer on his dark fur. Paralyzed, he stands still by a rusty fence while a group of locals approaches, phones in hand, recording everything. Among them, a young mother holds a baby who won't stop pointing at the dog, waving his arms toward the danger. Struggling to break free, the baby slips from her arms and rushes forward. When he's just inches away, the air grows heavy, and for a second, everything stops. The amber glow of sunset painted the sky above Millbrook, a small town in rural Montana where everyone knew each other's business and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her 6-month-old son, Tommy, in her arms as she walked along Maple Street, heading home from her weekly visit to the pediatrician. The baby had been fussier than usual lately, and Dr. Henderson had assured her it was just a phase, but something in her maternal instincts told her there was more to it. As they passed the old Riverside Park, a place that had been abandoned for nearly a decade after budget cuts forced the town to close it, Sarah noticed a small crowd gathering near the rusted iron fence. Curiosity got the better of her, and she approached slowly, wondering what could possibly draw people to this forgotten corner of town. What she saw made her heart stop. A magnificent German shepherd, one she recognized as Zeus, the beloved dog that belonged to old Mr. Patterson, who lived 3 blocks away, stood motionless in the center of the overgrown park. But Zeus wasn't alone. His entire body was covered in what appeared to be hundreds, maybe thousands of honeybees. They clung to his thick coat like a living, breathing blanket, their gentle buzzing creating an almost hypnotic symphony that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. "My God," whispered Margaret Thompson, the town's librarian, who stood beside her husband Robert, both of them transfixed by the extraordinary sight. "I've never seen anything like this in all my 73 years. Sarah found herself drawn closer, despite every rational thought telling her to turn around and walk away. Tommy, who had been restless and crying intermittently throughout the day, suddenly became completely calm in her arms. His tiny fists, which had been clenched in discomfort, slowly relaxed, and his bright blue eyes fixed on the scene before them with an intensity that was unsettling for such a young child. "Someone needs to call animal control," declared Frank. Williams, a middle-aged man who ran the local hardware store and had never been particularly fond of stray animals. His voice carried an edge of irritation that seemed out of place given the peaceful nature of what they were witnessing. "That dog could be rabid or sick. This isn't natural." But Dr. Emily Reeves, the town's veterinarian who had been called to the scene by a concerned neighbor, shook her head slowly. She had been observing Zeus for the past 10 minutes, and everything about his behavior suggested he was not in distress. "Look at his breathing," she said softly, addressing the small group that had gathered. "It's steady and calm. His ears aren't back. His tail isn't tucked. If he were afraid or in pain, we'd see signs of it." Sarah watched as more neighbors arrived, drawn by word that was spreading through the town like wildfire. There was something almost magical about the scene, something that defied explanation. The bees moved in perfect harmony around Zeus, never appearing agitated or aggressive. Instead, they seemed to be protecting him, forming a living shield that pulsed gently with their collective movement. Tommy began to make soft cooing sounds, his tiny hands reaching toward the park. Sarah tightened her grip on him, but noticed that for the first time in weeks, her son seemed completely at peace. The pediatrician had mentioned that some babies went through periods of unexplained restlessness, but seeing Tommy so calm now made her wonder if there had been something more profound troubling him. "Has anyone tried to contact Patterson?" asked Janet Miller, who ran the town's small post office and kept track of everyone's comings and goings. Zeus has been missing for 2 days. Patterson was beside himself with worry. He put up flyers all over town. This news sent a ripple of concern through the crowd. Everyone in Millbrook knew Harold Patterson, a quiet widower in his 70s who had adopted Zeus 5 years ago after his wife Eleanor passed away from cancer. The dog had become his constant companion, and it was completely unlike Zeus to wander off on his own. Sarah felt a strange pull toward the fence, as if some invisible force was drawing her closer. Tommy's reaction was even more pronounced now. He was leaning forward in her arms, his entire body straining toward the park, making soft sounds she had never heard him make before. It was as if he was trying to communicate something urgent, something important that only he could understand. "I don't like this," Frank muttered, crossing his arms over his chest. "Dogs don't just stand around covered in bees for no reason. Something's wrong here, and we're all just standing around like it's some kind of circus act." But the majority of the gathered townspeople seemed mesmerized rather than concerned. There was something undeniably peaceful about the scene, something that touched a deeper part of their souls that they couldn't quite name or explain. Even the children who had been brought by their parents seemed unusually quiet and attentive, as if they instinctively understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Dr. Reeves continued her quiet observation, making mental notes about Zeus's condition. His eyes were closed, but she could see the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the relaxed position of his limbs. Everything suggested that he was not only unharmed, but was perhaps experiencing something akin to a meditative state. As the minutes passed, Sarah noticed that Tommy was becoming increasingly agitated, not in distress, but in what seemed like excitement or anticipation. His tiny legs kicked against her arms, and he made insistent sounds that grew louder and more urgent. Other parents with children noticed similar behavior. Their own kids seemed strangely drawn to the scene, more focused and calm than usual. "Maybe we should call the fire department," suggested Robert Thompson, though his voice lacked conviction. "They have equipment for dealing with bee situations." "And disturb whatever's happening here?" Dr. Reeves responded gently. "I've never seen bees behave this way. They're not swarming in the traditional sense. This is something else entirely." The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the abandoned park. The golden light seemed to intensify the surreal quality of the scene, making the bees' movements appear almost choreographed, like dancers performing an ancient ritual that humans had long forgotten how to understand. Sarah found herself taking another step closer to the fence, despite her rational mind telling her to maintain a safe distance. Tommy's insistence was becoming impossible to ignore, and she realized that her maternal instincts were being pulled in 2 different directions. Part of her wanted to protect her son from any potential danger, while another part, deeper and more primal, seemed to understand that what they were witnessing was not dangerous at all, but rather something profound and necessary. The crowd continued to grow as word spread through Millbrook's tight-knit community. Some came out of curiosity, others out of concern for Zeus and Mr. Patterson. But once they arrived, everyone seemed to fall under the same spell of quiet fascination that had captured the initial witnesses. Sarah noticed how the different townspeople reacted to the extraordinary scene. The elderly Mrs. Hoffman from the end of Maple Street stood with her hands clasped to her chest, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she whispered what sounded like prayers. Young Jacob Miller, home from college for the summer, was frantically texting on his phone, trying to capture the moment in words that seemed inadequate for what he was witnessing. Even Mayor Patricia Collins had arrived, her usual political composure replaced by genuine wonder and concern. In 30 years of public service, she murmured to no one in particular. "I've never seen anything that defied explanation quite like this." The children in the crowd seemed particularly affected by the scene. 5-year-old Emma Foster had stopped her usual chatter and stood perfectly still, her wide eyes fixed on Zeus with an intensity that made her mother nervous. 8-year-old Michael Chen kept asking his parents why the bees weren't flying away, why they seemed so happy to stay with the dog, questions that no adult could answer satisfactorily. Tommy's reactions were becoming more pronounced with each passing minute. Sarah felt his small body tense and relax in patterns that seemed to correspond with the bees' movements. When the insects moved in tighter circles around Zeus, Tommy would grow calm. When they expanded their formation, he would become restless, as if he could sense the subtle changes in their collective energy. Dr. Reeves continued her professional observations, noting Zeus's vital signs from a distance. His breathing is steady, pupils appear normal from what I can see, no signs of distress or disorientation. Whatever's happening here, he's not suffering. But it was more than just the absence of suffering that struck the veterinarian. There was something almost beatific about Zeus's expression, a sense of purpose and peace that she had rarely seen in any animal, domestic or wild. As darkness began to approach, the question on everyone's mind remained unspoken but present. What would happen when night fell? Would Zeus remain in his mysterious vigil, or would the bees disperse, leaving behind answers to questions that no one quite knew how to ask? The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting an ethereal glow over the scene that somehow made it even more otherworldly. The bees' gentle humming seemed to harmonize with the evening sounds of the town, creating a symphony that spoke to something deep and primal in every person present. Harold Patterson arrived at the park just as the streetlights began to flicker on, casting an ethereal glow over the unusual scene. The 74-year-old man moved with surprising urgency despite his arthritic joints, having received Janet Miller's call about Zeus 20 minutes earlier. As he approached the crowd, Sarah could see the mixture of relief and bewilderment on his weathered face. "Zeus," he called softly, his voice thick with emotion. "What are you doing here, boy?" The German shepherd's ears twitched at the sound of his owner's voice, but he remained perfectly still, as if held in place by some invisible force. The bees continued their gentle dance around him, their collective humming growing slightly louder as Harold approached the fence. "Mr. Patterson," Dr. Reeves said, stepping forward, "how long has Zeus been missing exactly?" Harold's eyes never left his beloved companion as he spoke. 2 days. I woke up Tuesday morning and he was gone. Left the back gate open somehow. I've been searching everywhere." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "I thought I'd lost him for good." Sarah watched as Tommy's reaction intensified with Harold's arrival. Her son began to fuss in a way she had never experienced before, not crying exactly, but making urgent, almost pleading sounds. His tiny hands reached persistently toward the park, and she found herself having to grip him more firmly to keep him from squirming out of her arms. Margaret Thompson placed a gentle hand on Harold's shoulder. "He looks peaceful, Harold. Whatever's happening here, he doesn't seem to be in any distress." But Harold's expression grew troubled as he studied the scene more carefully. "This isn't like Zeus at all. He's always been afraid of bees. When Eleanor used to tend her flower garden, he would run inside the moment he heard buzzing." His voice carried a note of confusion that mirrored what everyone else was feeling. Frank Williams, who had been growing increasingly impatient, stepped forward. "Look, this is all very touching, but we can't just stand here all night. Someone needs to do something. What if those bees decide to attack? What if children get too close?" As if responding to his words, Tommy let out a sharp cry that cut through the evening air. Sarah tried to soothe him, but her son's distress was escalating rapidly. She noticed that other babies and young children in the crowd were beginning to show similar signs of agitation. "Maybe we should take the children home," suggested Carol Martinez, who had arrived with her 3-year-old daughter, Anna. "This is getting too strange for comfort." But as parents began to discuss leaving, something unexpected happened. Anna Martinez broke free from her mother's hand and ran toward the fence with surprising speed for a toddler. Carol lunged after her, but Dr. Reeves caught her arm. "Wait," the veterinarian said urgently. "Look." As Anna approached the fence, the bees' behavior changed dramatically. Their gentle circular motion around Zeus shifted, becoming more organized, more purposeful. They began to form intricate patterns in the air, weaving between the fence posts in what almost resembled a welcoming gesture. Tommy's cries suddenly stopped. Sarah felt his tiny body relax in her arms as he watched Anna with intense focus. The 3-year-old reached the fence and pressed her small hands against the metal bars, speaking in the kind of nonsensical language that young children often use, but with an urgency and intensity that seemed far beyond her years. "Anna, come, back here right now," Carol called, but her daughter ignored her completely. Harold Patterson's face had gone pale. He stared at the scene unfolding before him with growing recognition, as if pieces of a long-forgotten puzzle were suddenly falling into place. "Eleanor," he whispered so quietly that only Sarah, who was standing nearest to him, could hear. "What did you say?" Sarah asked gently. Harold turned to her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "My wife, Eleanor. She used to say the strangest things about animals and children. Said they could sense things that adults had forgotten how to feel." He paused, watching as more children in the crowd began to show signs of wanting to approach the fence. "She was a beekeeper, you know. Had 3 hives in our backyard until she got sick." This revelation sent a shock through Sarah's system. Suddenly, Zeus's presence in the abandoned park, covered in bees, took on a completely different meaning. "Mr. Patterson, are you saying that Zeus might have some connection to your wife's bees?" "I don't know," Harold admitted, his voice shaking. "The hives were destroyed after she passed. The doctor said it was too dangerous for me to maintain them alone. But Eleanor always insisted that her bees were special, that they understood things about people that people didn't understand about themselves." Sarah felt a chill as Harold's words sank in. She looked around at the gathered crowd, noting how many people seemed deeply affected by what they were witnessing. Mrs. Thompson was clutching her husband's arm, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something approaching awe. Even the teenagers who had arrived out of curiosity were standing quietly, their phones forgotten as they watched the unprecedented scene unfold. The evening air carried a sense of anticipation that seemed to affect everyone present. Dogs from neighboring houses had begun to gather at the edge of the crowd, not barking or showing signs of agitation, but simply sitting and watching with the same focused attention as their human companions. It was as if the entire community, both human and animal, was being drawn into whatever was happening in the abandoned park. Dr. Reeves had been listening intently to this exchange, while keeping one eye on Anna Martinez, who remained at the fence, seemingly in deep conversation with the bees. "Harold, did Eleanor ever mention anything about animals and bees working together? Any kind of partnership or communication?" Before Harold could answer, Frank Williams had had enough. "This is ridiculous," he declared loudly, striding toward the fence where Anna stood. "I'm not listening to any more of this nonsense about magical bees and mystical connections. That dog needs medical attention, and these children need to be taken home before someone gets hurt." His aggressive approach triggered an immediate and dramatic response. The bees around Zeus suddenly became agitated, their gentle humming transforming into an angry buzzing. They began to circle more rapidly, forming what appeared to be a protective barrier around both Zeus and the fence where Anna stood. Frank stopped abruptly, his face flushing with a mixture of anger and fear. "See? I told you this was dangerous. Now they're getting aggressive." But Sarah noticed something that others seemed to have missed. The bees weren't randomly agitated. They were specifically responding to Frank's hostility. When Anna spoke softly to them, they calmed. When other children approached gently, they resumed their peaceful patterns. It was only Frank's aggressive energy that had provoked them. The realization that the bees were responding to emotional energy rather than just physical presence added another layer of mystery to the already extraordinary situation. Sarah found herself wondering what other sensitivities these remarkable insects might possess, what other connections they might be capable of facilitating between the human and natural worlds. Tommy began making those urgent sounds again, and this time, Sarah felt a powerful maternal instinct she had never experienced before. It wasn't a protective urge to keep her son away from danger, it was the opposite. Every fiber of her being was telling her that Tommy needed to be closer to what was happening in the park. "I think," she said quietly, surprised by her own words, "I think my son wants to go to Zeus." The crowd fell silent at this announcement. All eyes turned to Sarah and Tommy, who was now reaching toward the park with both tiny hands, his blue eyes locked on the German Shepherd with an intensity that was almost unnerving. Dr. Reeves approached Sarah carefully. "What exactly are you feeling right now? As a mother, what are your instincts telling you?" Sarah considered the question seriously, trying to separate her rational fears from the deeper intuition that seemed to be guiding her. "I know it sounds crazy, but I feel like Tommy understands something about this situation that I don't. He's been restless and upset for weeks, and this is the calmest I've seen him since he was born." Harold Patterson stepped closer, his eyes bright with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Eleanor used to say that babies and animals lived in the same world, a world that adults lost touch with as they grew older. She believed that very young children could still sense the connections that hold everything together." Margaret Thompson, who had been quietly observing everything, spoke up. "My grandmother used to tell stories about animal guides and natural healers. Said there were people in every generation who could bridge the gap between the human world and the natural world." Frank Williams let out a derisive snort. "Oh, for crying out loud, now we're talking about animal guides and natural healers. This is the 21st century, people. Dogs get covered in bees because they're sick or confused, not because of some mystical connection to dead women and their magic bees." His words hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah felt Tommy's body tense in her arms. She looked around at the faces in the crowd and saw a clear division forming. Some, like Frank, wanted rational explanations and immediate action. Others, including Harold and Dr. Reeves, seemed open to the possibility that they were witnessing something beyond ordinary understanding. As the debate continued around her, Sarah found herself moving closer to the fence, drawn by an impulse she couldn't explain or resist. Tommy's excitement grew with each step, and she realized that whatever was about to happen, her son would be at the center of it. As Sarah stood at the fence with Tommy in her arms, Dr. Reeves made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her cell phone and made a call that surprised everyone present. "Professor Watson, it's Emily Reeves from Millbrook. I need you to come to Riverside Park immediately. Bring your equipment." She paused, listening to the response. "No, I'm not joking. Just trust me on this one." Harold Patterson looked puzzled. "Who's Professor Watson?" "Dr. James Watson from the University of Montana," Dr. Reeves explained. "He's an entomologist who specializes in bee behavior and communication. If anyone can help us understand what's happening here, it's him." Frank Williams shook his head in disgust. "Great. Now we're calling in scientists to study what any reasonable person can see is just a sick dog and a bunch of confused bees. But Harold was remembering something that made his heart race. Emily, did you say bee communication? Eleanor used to talk about that all the time. She insisted that her bees were trying to tell her things, especially near the end when she was... He couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah felt Tommy growing more restless in her arms, his small body vibrating. With an energy she had never felt before, Anna Martinez was still at the fence, and now 2 other young children had joined her, all of them speaking in their own languages to the bees, all of them completely calm despite their parents' growing anxiety. "Look at the children, Margaret," Thompson observed quietly. "They're not afraid at all. Maybe they know something we don't." Carol Martinez was torn between her desire to pull Anna away and a growing sense that her daughter was exactly where she needed to be. "Anna hasn't spoken this much in weeks," she admitted to Sarah. "She's usually so shy around strangers, but look at her now." Indeed, Anna was chattering away to the bees as if they were old friends, pointing at Zeus and making gestures that seemed surprisingly sophisticated for a 3-year-old. The bees responded to her movements, shifting their patterns in ways that almost seemed like responses to her words. Dr. Reeves was studying the interaction intently. "There's definitely a communication pattern here. The bees are responding to specific vocal tones and gestures from the children." Harold Patterson suddenly gripped Sarah's arm. "I need to tell you something about Eleanor. Something I've never told anyone else." His voice dropped to a whisper. "She could talk to bees. I know how that sounds, but I saw it with my own eyes for 15 years. They would land on her hands, her shoulders, even her face, and she would speak to them like they were people." Sarah's heart began to race. What kind of things would she say? She would ask them about the weather, about which flowers were blooming, about changes in the environment. But more than that, she would ask them about people, about neighbors who were sick, about children who were struggling, about families that needed help. Harold's eyes were bright with tears, and they would somehow give her answers. This revelation sent a chill through the small group that was listening. The implications were staggering and deeply personal for everyone present. Mrs. Thompson remembered how Eleanor had shown up at her door with homemade soup the day before she had even realized she was getting sick. Dr. Reeves recalled how Eleanor had suggested she check on the Martinez family's cat, leading to the early detection of a serious health condition. "Harold," Dr. Reeves said carefully, "are you saying that Eleanor received information about the community's needs through her bees?" "I know how it sounds," Harold replied, his voice strengthening with the relief of finally sharing his secret. "But Eleanor helped more people in this town than anyone will ever know. And she always said it was because the bees told her where help was needed most." Dr. Reeves looked fascinated rather than skeptical. "Harold, did Eleanor ever mention anything about animal intermediaries, about using animals to communicate with bees?" Before Harold could answer, Zeus opened his eyes for the first time since the ordeal began. His gentle brown gaze swept across the crowd, pausing on each of the children, then settling on Tommy with an intensity that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Tommy immediately stopped fussing and stared back at Zeus with equal intensity. The connection between the baby and the dog was palpable, as if they were having a conversation that no one else could hear or understand. "My God," whispered Janet Miller. "Look at them. It's like they know each other." Harold's face had gone white. Eleanor always said that Zeus was special. She claimed he could sense things about people that even she couldn't pick up on. She used to joke that he was her translator when the bees had complicated messages to share. The crowd was growing larger as more families arrived, drawn by the news spreading through Millbrook's interconnected community. Pastor Williams from the Methodist Church stood quietly with his wife, their usual Sunday composure replaced by something approaching reverence. The local pharmacist, Mrs. Chen, had closed her shop early to witness what people were calling either a miracle or a crisis, depending on their perspective. Tommy's behavior was becoming increasingly significant to Sarah. Every maternal instinct she possessed was telling her that her son's distress over the past weeks hadn't been random infant discomfort. It had been a longing for something specific, something he had found here in this abandoned park. Frank Williams had heard enough. "This is absolutely insane. You people are standing around talking about dead women and telepathic dogs and magical bees like we're living in some kind of fairy tale. I'm calling animal control myself." He pulled out his phone, but before he could dial, something extraordinary happened. Tommy began to cry. Not the frustrated cries he had been making earlier, but deep, mournful sounds that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and profound. As his cries echoed through the evening air, the bees around Zeus began to respond. Their humming growing louder and more complex, as if they were harmonizing with the baby's distress. "Stop!" Dr. Reeves said urgently to Frank. "Don't make that call, not yet." "Why not?" Frank demanded, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Even he seemed affected by the haunting quality of Tommy's cries and the bees' response. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to her son's cries. They weren't cries of pain or hunger or ordinary infant distress. They were cries of recognition, of longing, of a deep sadness that seemed impossible for such a young child to feel. "He's grieving," she whispered, the words coming from some deep, intuitive place she didn't know she possessed. "But how can a 6-month-old baby be grieving?" Harold Patterson's hands were shaking as he reached toward the fence. "Eleanor! He's grieving for Eleanor!" The crowd fell silent, except for Tommy's cries and the bees' responding hum. Dr. Reeves was recording everything on her phone, her scientific mind trying to process what her eyes and ears were telling her. "Harold," she said carefully, "when exactly did Eleanor pass away?" 6 months and 3 days ago, Harold replied, his voice barely audible. Sarah felt her knees go weak. "Tommy is exactly 6 months old. He was born 3 days after." She couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. The implications were staggering and impossible, and yet completely consistent with everything they were witnessing. Margaret Thompson spoke what everyone was thinking. "Are you suggesting that this baby has some connection to Eleanor Patterson? That somehow her spirit or essence or whatever you want to call it is connected to this child?" Dr. Reeves was approaching the situation from a different angle. There are documented cases of animals displaying unusual behavior around the time of significant emotional events. And there's growing scientific evidence that bees can sense electromagnetic changes in their environment, including changes in human emotional states. But Harold was beyond scientific explanations. Eleanor always said that love doesn't die, it just changes form. She said that when her time came, she would find a way to keep helping people, to keep healing. He looked at Tommy with wonder and recognition. "She said she would send a sign." As if responding to Harold's words, Zeus slowly stood up. The bees maintained their coverage of his body, but they began to shift and move in more complex patterns. The German shepherd took one careful step toward the fence, then another, his movements deliberate and purposeful. Tommy's cries transformed into soft cooing sounds as Zeus approached. The baby reached toward the dog with both hands, making the same urgent gestures that had characterized his behavior all evening. Sarah found herself moving closer to the fence, despite every rational thought telling her to step back. "I think," she said, her voice shaking, "I think Tommy wants me to take him into the park." The suggestion sent a shockwave through the crowd. Carol Martinez instinctively moved to protect her daughter, while other parents pulled their children back from the fence. But Dr. Reeves was studying the situation with clinical fascination. The bees haven't shown any aggressive behavior toward the children. If anything, they seem to be responding positively to their presence. Frank Williams stepped forward, his face red with frustration. "Absolutely not. I will not stand here and watch a mother put her infant in danger because of some ridiculous theory about ghost wives and psychic dogs." His raised voice caused the bees to agitate slightly, their humming becoming more intense. Zeus turned his gentle gaze toward Frank, and for a moment, the man seemed to falter under the dog's steady stare. Professor Watson's arrival interrupted the tense standoff. The tall, bearded scientist approached the group with equipment bags slung over both shoulders, his eyes immediately drawn to the extraordinary scene in the park. "Dear God," he breathed, setting down his equipment. "I've studied bee behavior for 25 years, and I've never seen anything like this." His presence seemed to give Dr. Reeves more confidence in her scientific approach. "Professor, what's your initial assessment of the bees' behavior?" Professor Watson was already pulling out instruments, his trained eye cataloging every detail of the scene. "This isn't swarming behavior, and it's not defensive posturing. If I didn't know better, I'd say they're performing some kind of protective ritual." He paused, looking at the children gathered at the fence. "And they're definitely responding to human presence in a way that defies conventional understanding of bee-human interaction." As the two scientists began their analysis, Sarah felt Tommy's urgency growing stronger. Her maternal instincts were pulling her in directions she had never imagined possible toward a decision that would require faith in something far beyond scientific explanation. Professor Watson's instruments were detecting unprecedented patterns in the bees' electromagnetic signatures. "Dr. Reeves, you need to see this," he called out, his voice filled with scientific excitement and bewilderment. "The frequency of their wing beats is synchronized to a degree that shouldn't be possible without some kind of external coordinator." The arrival of the scientist had brought a new dynamic to the gathering. Some townspeople felt reassured by the presence of academic expertise, while others worried that scientific analysis might somehow disturb the delicate balance of what was occurring. Professor Watson himself seemed torn between his desire to document everything and his growing sense that what he was witnessing transcended conventional scientific understanding. "Professor," called out Mayor Collins, who had been observing quietly from the edge of the crowd, "in your professional opinion, is there any danger to the community from this situation?" Professor Watson considered his response carefully, aware that his words could influence how the town chose to handle the extraordinary circumstances. From a purely scientific standpoint, the bees are displaying coordinated behavior that suggests a high level of organization and purpose. They're not exhibiting signs of swarming aggression or territorial defense. Frank Williams was growing more agitated by the minute. "I don't care what your fancy equipment says. This situation is dangerous, and I'm not going to stand here and watch children get hurt because you people want to believe in fairy tales." His aggressive energy was clearly affecting the bees, who responded with increasingly agitated buzzing whenever he spoke. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore, and several community members were beginning to voice their concerns about Frank's disruptive presence. "Frank," said Mrs. Thompson gently, "maybe you should step back and let us handle this calmly." "Step back?" Frank's voice rose sharply. "This is my community too, and I have a right to protect people from dangerous situations, even if they're too caught up in magical thinking to protect themselves." Dr. Reeves noticed the pattern and made a suggestion that surprised everyone. "Frank, I think you should step back. The bees are responding negatively to your stress levels." "My stress levels?" Frank's voice rose an octave. Of course I'm stressed. There's a dog covered in thousands of bees. Children are trying to get near them, and everyone's acting like this is some kind of religious experience instead of a veterinary emergency. Harold Patterson, who had been quietly observing the exchanges, stepped forward with surprising firmness. Frank, you need to calm down or leave. Eleanor always said that bees could sense fear and anger from a mile away, and they respond to it as a threat. Eleanor this, Eleanor that, Frank snapped. Your wife has been gone for 6 months, Harold. She's not conducting some magical bee orchestra from beyond the grave. The moment those words left Frank's mouth, the entire atmosphere in the park changed. Zeus, who had been calmly standing near the fence, suddenly lifted his head and let out a low, mournful howl that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. The bees' gentle humming transformed into a complex symphony of sound that sent chills down everyone's spine. The sound seemed to trigger something primal in the gathered crowd. Several people began to cry, not from fear, but from a deep, emotional response to the haunting beauty of the moment. Children instinctively moved closer to their parents, while the adults found themselves drawn together by the shared experience of witnessing something beyond their understanding. Tommy, who had been relatively calm in Sarah's arms, began to cry with an intensity that broke her heart. But these weren't ordinary infant cries, they were the sounds of someone experiencing profound grief and loss. Sarah, Dr. Reeves said urgently, I think you need to take Tommy into the park. Now. The suggestion sent the crowd into chaos. Several parents began calling out objections. Carol Martinez pulled Anna back from the fence, and Frank Williams positioned himself between Sarah and the park entrance. Absolutely not, Frank declared. I will not allow this madness to go any further. But Sarah was beyond listening to protests or logical arguments. Every instinct she possessed as a mother was screaming at her that her son needed to be with Zeus and the bees. Tommy's cries were growing more desperate, and she could feel his tiny body trembling with an emotion that seemed far too powerful for someone so young. The battle of wills that was developing between Frank and the rest of the community reflected deeper tensions that had been building in Millbrook for months. The town had been struggling economically since the lumber mill closed. Families had been moving away, and a sense of hopelessness had settled over many residents. Frank's desperate need to control the situation seemed to represent the community's broader struggle to maintain order in the face of forces beyond their control. Move aside, Frank, she said quietly, but with a steel in her voice that surprised everyone, including herself. Professor Watson was frantically taking readings, his equipment registering energy patterns that defied explanation. The electromagnetic field around the park is fluctuating in ways that correspond directly to the infant's vocalizations. There's definitely a connection here that we don't understand. Dr. Reeves stepped beside Sarah, offering professional support. I'll go with you. If there's any sign of danger, we'll leave immediately. Harold Patterson was already moving toward the park's old entrance, which had been chained shut for years. I have a key, he said, pulling a rusty ring from his pocket. Eleanor and I used to maintain this place as volunteers before the city. Abandoned it? Frank Williams was beside himself. This is insane. You're going to put a baby in danger because of some pseudo-scientific nonsense about electromagnetic fields and ghost wives. But his protests were drowned out by Tommy's increasingly urgent cries. Sarah could feel her son's desperation reaching a crescendo, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had to act. As Harold unlocked the old gate, the rusty chains falling away with a clang that echoed through the evening air, the bees' behavior shifted dramatically. Instead of the agitated buzzing that had characterized their response to Frank's negativity, they began to move in slow, welcoming circles around Zeus. Ana Martinez broke free from her mother's grip again and ran toward the open gate. "I want to help the doggy," she called out, her 3-year-old voice clear and determined. Carol Martinez started after her daughter, but Dr. Reeves caught her arm. "Carol, look at Anna. Really look at her." The little girl was approaching Zeus without any fear, speaking to him in the soothing tones that children often use with hurt animals. As she got closer, the bees began to create a pathway for her, moving aside but maintaining their protective formation around the German Shepherd. "Anna's never approached strange dogs before," Carol whispered, her voice filled with wonder and concern. "She's usually terrified of animals." Sarah took a deep breath and stepped through the gate, Tommy clutched securely in her arms. The moment they crossed the threshold into the park, Tommy's cries stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was almost more unnerving than his previous distress. Professor Watson's equipment began registering readings that made him question everything he thought he knew about bee behavior. The entire swarm is operating as a single entity. The coordination level suggests a collective intelligence that we haven't observed in nature before. Harold Patterson followed Sarah into the park, his eyes bright with tears. "Eleanor, if you're somehow behind this, please keep them safe," he whispered. As Sarah approached Zeus, the bees began to create intricate patterns in the air around them. Tommy reached out with both tiny hands, his fingers splayed wide, as if trying to touch something invisible in the air between himself and the dog. Zeus opened his eyes and looked directly at Tommy with an expression of such profound recognition and gentleness that Sarah felt her heart stop. The dog slowly lowered his head, bringing his face closer to Tommy's level. Frank Williams couldn't stand it anymore. "This has gone far enough," he shouted, charging toward the gate. But the moment he crossed the threshold into the park, the bees reacted with fierce protectiveness. They didn't attack him, but they formed a wall of sound and movement that stopped him in his tracks. The message was clear. He was not welcome in this sacred space. Dr. Reeves grabbed Frank's arm and pulled him back outside the gate. "Frank, you're disrupting whatever's happening here. Your anger is affecting the entire dynamic." Meanwhile, Sarah had reached Zeus. Tommy was making soft cooing sounds now, his tiny hand extended toward the dog's nose. As baby and dog looked at each other, the bees began to move in patterns that were almost like a dance, creating spirals and waves in the air around them. Ana Martinez had positioned herself beside Zeus, one small hand resting gently on the dog's side. "He's not scared anymore," she announced with the matter-of-fact wisdom that only children possess. Professor Watson was documenting everything, but his scientific objectivity was being challenged by what he was witnessing. This level of interspecies communication and bee coordination is unprecedented. We're either observing a completely new phenomenon or... He couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood what he was thinking. They were either witnessing something that would revolutionize scientific understanding of animal behavior, or they were experiencing something that transcended scientific explanation entirely. Harold Patterson moved closer to the group, his weathered face illuminated by wonder. Eleanor always said that love creates bridges between worlds that logic can't explain. As Tommy's tiny fingers finally made contact with Zeus's warm nose, a transformation began that would change everyone's understanding of the connections that bind all living things together. The bees' humming shifted into harmonies that seemed to resonate with frequencies beyond human hearing, and the evening air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. Frank Williams, still being held back at the gate, watched in spite of himself as something extraordinary unfolded before his eyes. Something that challenged every rational belief he had ever held about the world and the way it worked. The moment Tommy's tiny fingers made contact with Zeus's nose, the world seemed to hold its breath. The bees humming transformed into something that transcended sound, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the earth itself and resonate through every living thing in the park. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sensation of overwhelming love and peace that brought tears to her eyes. Tommy gazed into Zeus's gentle brown eyes with an expression of recognition so profound that it seemed impossible for a 6-month-old infant. But it was Harold Patterson who experienced the most dramatic transformation. As he watched his beloved dog connect with the baby, memories flooded back with startling clarity, memories that had been suppressed by grief and disbelief. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Oh my God, Eleanor." Dr. Reeves moved closer, her scientific curiosity balanced by deep respect for what was clearly a sacred moment. "Harold, what are you remembering?" Harold's hands were shaking as he spoke. 3 days before Eleanor passed, she told me something that I thought was just the medication talking. She said she had made an arrangement with her bees, that they had agreed to help her keep a promise. The crowd outside the gate had grown completely silent, everyone straining to hear Harold's words. "What kind of promise?" Sarah asked softly, never taking her eyes off Tommy and Zeus. "She promised that she would find a way to help heal the sadness in our town, the loneliness and fear that had been growing since the factory closed and families started leaving." Harold wiped tears from his cheeks. "She said there was a special child coming, a child who would need guidance and protection, and that she would make sure that child received it." Professor Watson's equipment was registering energy patterns that defied every scientific model he knew. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts. Whatever's happening here is generating fields that shouldn't be possible with just biological activity. Ana Martinez, still standing beside Zeus with one small hand on his fur, looked up at the adults with the serene wisdom of childhood. "The lady in the bees is very nice. She wants to help everyone feel better." Carol Martinez gasped from outside the gate. "Anna, what lady?" "The pretty lady with the flowers," Anna replied matter-of-factly. "She lives in the bee song now. She says the baby is very special and needs to learn important things." Sarah felt a chill of recognition run down her spine. "Harold, did Eleanor have a flower garden?" "The most beautiful garden in 3 counties, Harold replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She wore flowers in her hair every day until she got too sick to tend them." As if responding to their conversation, the bees began to create even more intricate patterns, forming shapes that almost resembled flowers blooming and dancing in the air. Tommy laughed for the first time since the ordeal began, a pure sound of joy that seemed to trigger something in Zeus. The German shepherd slowly lowered himself to the ground, positioning his body so that Tommy could more easily reach him. The bees adjusted their formation, creating a protective circle around all 3 of them, Tommy, Zeus, and Anna, while maintaining their gentle, almost musical humming. Dr. Reeves was documenting everything, but she was also experiencing something personal and profound. "I've been a veterinarian for 15 years, and I've never seen an animal display this level of conscious cooperation and emotional intelligence." Frank Williams, still held back at the gate but no longer struggling against Dr. Reeves' restraint, found his voice. "This isn't possible. Animals don't behave this way. Bees don't form protective circles around babies and dogs." But even as he spoke the words, his conviction was wavering. What he was witnessing challenged every rational belief he held, yet the evidence was undeniable before his eyes. Professor Watson looked up from his instruments with an expression of scientific wonder mixed with personal awe. "Frank, I've spent my entire career studying bee behavior, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what we're observing is not normal bee behavior. but it's happening nonetheless. Harold Patterson moved closer to Sarah and Tommy, his face transformed by understanding and acceptance. Eleanor always said that love was the most powerful force in the universe, stronger than science, stronger than logic, stronger even than the boundary between life and the next phase of existence. Sarah felt Tommy's tiny body relax completely in her arms as he continued his gentle interaction with Zeus. The baby's cries and restlessness of the past weeks suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't been sick or uncomfortable. He had been searching for this connection, this moment of recognition and reunion. "Harold," she said quietly, "I think Tommy has been looking for Eleanor. I think somehow he knew she was trying to reach out to him." The implications of Sarah's words sent ripples of emotion through everyone present. Margaret Thompson spoke what many were thinking. "Are you saying that Eleanor somehow chose Tommy, that she's been trying to connect with him through Zeus and the bees?" Before Harold could answer, something even more extraordinary happened. The bees began to form letters in the air, their coordinated flight patterns creating shapes that spelled out words visible to everyone present. The first word appeared slowly, the bees moving with deliberate precision. "Love." Gasps echoed from the crowd as the second word formed, "heals," and then the third, "all." Professor Watson nearly dropped his equipment. "This is impossible. Bees cannot coordinate their flight patterns to form letters. They don't have the cognitive capacity for symbolic communication." But the evidence was floating in the air before them, created by hundreds of bees moving in perfect synchronization. Frank Williams fell to his knees at the gate, his worldview crumbling around him. "I don't understand any of this." Dr. Reeves knelt beside him, her own eyes bright with tears. "Maybe understanding isn't the point, Frank. Maybe acceptance is." As the bee-formed words dissolved and reformed into new patterns, Ana Martinez began to speak in a voice that seemed older and wiser than her 3 years should allow. "The flower lady says that love never really goes away. It just changes into new kinds of helping. She says that when people are very sad and scared, love finds new ways to reach them." Harold Patterson sank to the ground beside Zeus, his hand joining Anna's in gently stroking the dog's fur. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry I didn't believe. I'm so sorry. I doubted." The bee's humming grew softer, more soothing, as if responding to Harold's pain and regret. Zeus turned his gentle gaze toward his longtime companion, and in that look, Harold saw forgiveness and understanding that transcended human language. Tommy reached out his other tiny hand and touched Harold's weathered cheek. In that moment, of connection between the elderly widower and the infant, Sarah felt something shift in the very air around them. The sadness and isolation that had characterized Harold's life since Eleanor's passing began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection he thought he had lost forever. "She's still here," Harold whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "She never really left." Dr. Reeves approached the group slowly, her scientific mind struggling to process what her heart was accepting without question. "What exactly is happening here, Harold, in terms that we can all understand?" Harold looked up at her with eyes bright with newfound hope. "Eleanor is teaching us that death isn't an ending, it's a transformation. She's showing us that love can take any form necessary to heal the wounds in our community." The bees began to disperse, slowly, not flying away, but settling gently on the ground around Zeus, forming a living carpet of gold and black. Zeus remained calm and still, allowing Tommy to continue touching his face with tiny, exploring fingers. "Professor," Watson was still taking readings, but his focus had shifted from purely scientific observation to something more personal. If I write about this in my research, no one will believe it. Maybe, said Dr. Reeves, some things aren't meant to be proven, just experienced. As the evening stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the transformation that had begun with a dog covered in bees was revealing itself to be something far more profound, a healing that reached into the hearts of everyone present and promised to ripple outward through their small community in ways they were only beginning to imagine. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the Montana sky, the atmosphere in Riverside Park continued to pulsate with an energy that none of the witnesses could have imagined possible just hours earlier. The bees had settled into a peaceful formation around Zeus, Tommy, Anna, and Harold, creating a living mandala that seemed to breathe with collective purpose. Sarah felt a profound change taking place within herself as she held Tommy, who had fallen into the most peaceful sleep she had ever seen him experience. For weeks, she'd been consumed with worry about his restlessness, his crying, his apparent discomfort with the world around him. Now, she understood that he hadn't been suffering, he had been searching. "Dr. Reeves," she said softly, "I need to ask you something that might sound strange." The veterinarian approached with careful steps, mindful not to disturb the delicate balance that had been achieved. "After everything we've witnessed tonight, I don't think anything could sound strange anymore." "Tommy's father left when I was 5 months pregnant," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "I've been raising him alone, and I've been so afraid that I wasn't enough, that he needed something I couldn't give him." Dr. Reeves knelt beside her, her professional demeanor softened by genuine compassion. "And now I think maybe he needed exactly what happened here tonight. Maybe he needed to find Eleanor, and maybe Eleanor needed to find him." Sarah looked down at her sleeping son, his tiny fist curled around a few strands of Zeus's fur. "Maybe we all needed this." Harold Patterson had been sitting in quiet contemplation, his hand resting on Zeus's side, feeling the gentle rhythm of the dog's breathing and the soft vibrations from the settled bees. "Sarah, can I tell you something about Eleanor that I've never shared with anyone?" She nodded, sensing that whatever Harold was about to reveal would be significant. "Eleanor couldn't have children of her own. We tried for 20 years, went through every treatment available, but it just wasn't meant to be." His voice was thick with old pain and new understanding. "She used to say that maybe her purpose wasn't to be a mother in the traditional sense, but to be a guardian angel for children who needed extra protection." The implications of Harold's words hung in the air like a blessing. Anna Martinez, who'd been quietly humming along with the bees' gentle vibrations, looked up at the adults with her characteristic 3-year-old directness. "The flower lady says she's going to take care of lots of babies now, not just Tommy." Carol Martinez, who had been observing from the gate with growing acceptance of the extraordinary events, stepped forward tentatively. "Anna, what else does the flower lady say?" Anna tilted her head as if listening to sounds only she could hear. "She says that people forgot how to help each other, but the bees remember. She says the bees are going to teach people how to make the sadness go away." Professor Watson, who'd been documenting everything with scientific precision, found himself setting aside his instruments and simply experiencing the moment. "I came here to study bee behavior, but I think I'm learning something more important about human behavior." Frank Williams, who had remained at the gate in stunned silence for the past hour, finally spoke. "I owe everyone an apology. I was so focused on what I thought was logical and safe that I almost prevented something beautiful from happening." Dr. Reeves walked over to him, her expression gentle. "Frank, "What are you feeling right now?" "Confused," he admitted. "Everything. I thought I knew about the world has been turned upside down in one evening, but also—" He paused, searching for words. "Also hopeful, in a way I haven't felt in years." Margaret Thompson, who had been watching everything with the wisdom of her 73 years, stepped closer to the group in the park. "Frank, maybe that's the real message here. Maybe Eleanor is showing us that hope can come from the most unexpected places." As if responding to her words, Zeus slowly stood up, the bees adjusting their positions but maintaining their protective formation. The German shepherd walked over to Frank at the gate, looked up at him with those same gentle, understanding eyes that had connected with Tommy, and wagged his tail. Frank knelt down and tentatively reached through the gate to pet Zeus's head. The moment his hand made contact with the dog's fur, several bees landed gently on his wrist, not stinging, just resting there as if offering their own form of forgiveness and acceptance. Tears began to flow down Frank's weathered cheeks. "I've been angry for so long. Since my wife passed 2 years ago, since the factory closed, since it felt like everything good was disappearing from this town." Harold nodded with deep understanding. "Grief makes us afraid, Frank. It makes us want to control everything, because we couldn't control the things that really mattered." Sarah felt Tommy stirring in her arms, not with distress, but with contentment. As he opened his eyes and looked around at the faces surrounding him, she saw something in his expression that she had never seen before: complete peace. "Professor Watson," she said, "from a scientific perspective, what do you think has really happened here tonight?" The entomologist considered his words carefully. "Scientifically, I can document unprecedented bee behavior, unusual electromagnetic readings, and coordination patterns that challenge everything we understand about insect intelligence." He paused, looking at Tommy and Zeus. "But personally, I think we've witnessed something that science isn't equipped to fully explain or understand." Dr. Reeves added her own perspective. "In my veterinary practice, I've learned that animals often sense things about human emotional and physical states that we're not consciously aware of. But what we've seen tonight goes far beyond that." Anna. Martinez had begun to hum again, her young voice harmonizing with the bees' gentle vibrations. Other children who had arrived with their families were now approaching the gate, drawn by the same inexplicable attraction that had brought Anna and Tommy to this place. "Look," Carol Martinez observed with wonder. "All the children want to be here." Indeed, 5 other families had arrived as word spread through Millbrook, and each child under the age of 5 was showing the same calm fascination with the scene in the park. Harold smiled, the first genuine smile he had managed since Eleanor's passing. Eleanor always said that children live closer to the truth than adults do. They haven't learned yet that some things are supposed to be impossible. As more families gathered, the atmosphere became one of community healing rather than individual experience. Parents who hadn't spoken to each other in months found themselves standing together, united by the shared wonder of what they were witnessing. Janet Miller, who had arrived with her grandson, spoke for many of them. "I feel like we're all being given a gift tonight, a reminder of what really matters." Professor Watson began packing up his equipment, but not because he was done studying the phenomenon. "I think," he said, "this is something that needs to be experienced rather than analyzed, at least for tonight." Zeus returned to his position beside Tommy, who reached out once again to touch the dog's nose. The bees responded by creating gentle, swirling patterns in the air above them, and the collective humming grew softer and more melodic. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that was on everyone's mind. Harold looked at his beloved companion and the baby who had somehow become the bridge between his past grief and future hope. Now we trust that Eleanor's love will continue to guide us through Zeus, through the bees, and through the connections we've discovered here tonight. Dr. Reeves nodded thoughtfully, and we remember that healing comes in forms we don't always expect or understand. As the night deepened around them, the people of Millbrook found themselves part of something larger than their individual lives, part of a story that would be retold for generations, a story about love that transcends the boundaries between life and what comes after, about the healing power of unexpected connections, and about the wisdom that children and animals carry in their hearts. 3 months had passed since the extraordinary evening at Riverside Park, and the changes in Millbrook were evident to anyone who visited the small Montana town. The abandoned park had been transformed into a community garden, with Harold Patterson leading the restoration efforts and Eleanor's memory honored in every flowering plant and buzzing beehive that now called the Space Home. Sarah Mitchell walked through the garden paths with Tommy, now 9 months old and taking his first tentative steps. Zeus padded alongside them, the German shepherd having become an unofficial guardian for all the children who visited the park daily. Sarah called out Carol Martinez, approaching with Anna, who at 3.5 had become something of a local celebrity for her ability to communicate with the bees. Dr. Reeves emerged from the small veterinary clinic that had been established at one corner of the park. "The new bee hives are thriving," she announced with satisfaction. Harold Patterson looked up from the flower bed he was tending, his face glowing with contentment. "She would be so proud of what we've created here," he said, gesturing toward the thriving garden. Frank Williams arrived carrying tools for his weekly volunteer shift. The transformation in Frank had been dramatic, the anger and fear replaced by gentleness and openness that surprised everyone who knew him. Professor Watson arrived for his monthly visit. "I've been contacted by researchers from 7 other universities who want to study the connection between bee behavior and community healing." Anna Martinez ran over to the group, her face bright with excitement. "The flower lady says more towns are going to get bee helpers." Sarah settled onto a bench with Tommy, watching as Zeus positioned himself nearby. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much our lives have changed." Indeed, the story of Millbrook's healing had spread through social media and word of mouth, attracting visitors from across the country who came seeking their own experiences of connection and healing. Tommy took a few wobbling steps toward Zeus, his face lighting up with joy as the dog gently nuzzled his small hand. The connection between them remained as strong as ever. As families gathered for the weekly community dinner, Zeus made his rounds offering comfort, while the bees continued their gentle work among the flowers. Anna looked up from playing with the other children and called out with confidence, "The flower lady says we need to make a special story about what happened here, so other people can learn about love that doesn't go away." Harold felt tears spring to his eyes as he realized what Eleanor was suggesting. A story that people can share with each other, that can travel to places we'll never go and touch hearts we'll never meet. Dr. Reeves nodded enthusiastically. "We could create multiple ways for people to experience this story, to understand that healing and hope can come from the most unexpected places." Frank Williams added, "And we could use any proceeds to help other communities create their own healing spaces." As the evening continued and the idea took shape, the people of Millbrook realized that their story was far from over. Eleanor's love, channeled through Zeus and the bees, through Tommy and Anna, was meant to ripple outward, touching lives in ways they were only beginning to imagine. Sarah looked down at Tommy, who had fallen asleep in her arms despite the cheerful noise around them. and felt deep gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. Zeus settled at her feet with a contented sigh, his watchful eyes scanning the gathering to ensure everyone was safe and happy. The bees hummed their gentle evening song, and somewhere in that harmony, Sarah could almost hear Eleanor's voice, whispering words of love and encouragement that would continue to echo through the lives of everyone who had been touched by this miraculous tale of connection, healing, and the enduring power of love. Fim de Historia. Dear friends, we hope that the story of Sarah, Tommy, Harold, Zeus, and the remarkable bees of Millbrook has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. Like the ripples of love that Eleanor created through her extraordinary gift, stories like this one have the power to heal and inspire across all boundaries. If this tale has moved you, we invite you to become part of its continuing journey by subscribing to our channel, where we share similar stories of hope, healing, and the unexpected miracles that surround us every day. Please take a moment to like this video and share your own thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We believe that every person who hears this story adds their own thread to the tapestry of healing that Eleanor began. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these transformative tales to people who need them most, creating a community of hearts connected by the understanding that love truly never dies. It simply finds new ways to reach us. Join us in spreading this message of hope, one story at a time.